You're listening to the Vari Longmuir Podcast, episode number 12. Welcome to the Vari Longmuir Podcast, and as you may have guessed, I'm your host, Vari. Since stepping away from the 9-to-5 world back in 2009, I've been a creative director, illustrator, artist, business mentor, and coach to fellow creative types. The intention with this podcast is to offer a fresh perspective about what it really means to be a working creative. I'm offering simple strategies to add a little more joy to your days and sharing my own insights and lessons learned, often the hard way, from over a decade of being my own boss. Now let's get into today's episode. Hi guys, and welcome to this week's podcast. It is a pretty big and exciting week over here at Vari Longmuir HQ because I am moving house this week. So it's been a big last few days of packing and arranging removalists and contacting all the companies. There's always so much more to do when you're moving than I remember from all the times when I've moved house before. And this one is pretty funny because I am literally moving around the corner. I think it's about 200 meters from door to door. So there was a moment where I thought that perhaps I wouldn't arrange removalists and I would just do it all by myself. But then I quickly decided that my time was better spent doing other things rather than lugging around huge big pieces of furniture and packing and unpacking a removal truck. So I have arranged removalists and they will arrive at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning to drive the 200 meters around the corner to my new house. Now, this house that the boys and I are moving to is a bit of a stretch house for us. And by stretch house, I mean that it's definitely a house that we will be able to grow into. It's got much more space than the house we're currently in. And there's going to be, much more space for us to grow into whatever is around the corner for us as a family. I will be recording a full episode on the whole process of how this new house came about and how I managed to align everything in order to make this move as smooth and as magical as possible. The magic is still unfolding at the moment, so I want to wait until this paragraph of this chapter of this story that is Vari's life is complete before I share it with you all, but I will be sure and do that in the coming weeks or months. What I want to talk about in this week's episode is the idea of creating more space in your life. I am a firm believer in the idea that our physical environment has a huge impact energetically on us in our life and in the work that we do. This house that the boys and I are in at the moment, I am currently sitting on the floor in my bedroom because everything else is packed up and this is the only room that does not have a ridiculous amount of echo in it. So I'm currently sitting on the floor of my bedroom like a 17-year-old with my laptop in front of me. I will actually post a picture on Instagram, so go over and check it out. This house that we moved to has been such a special house for the boys and I. And I've really enjoyed the time that we've spent here. And now it is time for that move, for that next step for us. This house that we're in at the moment has been so special because this was the first house that the boys and I moved into as a trio. This was the first house that we moved to after my ex-husband, their dad, and I decided to separate. And so it's been really special for us to move into this new phase of what our family looks like and to find a new rhythm and routine around that. This current house that we're in just now, that we're about to move from, has absolutely no storage. And we were forced to be super intentional about what we actually brought into the space because there simply wasn't that much space. It was small and it was perfect. And it really allowed me to get back to basics, which is something that I really needed at that point in my life. I had to consider everything that came in because there just wasn't space to store anything. There was no space to keep anything for maybes. We had to be really intentional about it all and really choose things that we were going to be using on a daily or a weekly basis. Otherwise, we just didn't bring it into our house. And this idea of being intentional really filtered down and allowed me to get intentional about the people that I would spend time with and also the projects that I would take on and work as well. So it was this really beautiful process of getting back to basics and then intentionally bringing things back in from that new base. This new house that we are about to move to tomorrow is certainly bigger, and there's more space and there's lots more storage. And I caught myself thinking over the last few weeks about the idea of having to fill the space. I was putting this crazy amount of pressure on myself, I realized. And I was thinking that I needed to buy all this new furniture for this new house before I even moved in. I could really sense this kind of frantic energy and a sense of impatience in me. I was telling myself things like, I need to buy a new dining table. The dining table we have at the moment in this little tiny house is a little round table that seats four. And in the new house, there's this beautiful big space with these bay views that I'll be able to put this big, beautiful 8 or 10 seater dining table in. But I was telling myself that I needed to have this before I even moved in. Also, things like I needed a new sofa. I had a new walk-in robe, so I would need more clothes to fill the robe because I had all this hanging space and all these shelves now, which seems crazy to think, but these were the things that were going on in my mind as I was lying awake at 2 o'clock in the morning. Also, silly little things like I've got a bigger laundry space. So I was telling myself that I need to buy more linens and to buy more towels because I've got space to store them. I've also got this little walk-in pantry, which is a huge upgrade from the 3 cupboards I have in my kitchen at the moment. And I was telling myself that I needed to buy these new kitchen appliances and all these new spices to put on shelves for this new pantry, which is just crazy because I don't even really particularly love cooking. And so the idea that I had now this spice shelf that I had to fill with spices, it's just a crazy idea, but my mind went there and I was stressed out about what spices a spice shelf should hold. I also have a garage in this house, which I've never had before. And I was getting stressed out about thinking, what kind of stuff do you have to put in a garage other than a car? I don't have any tools. I don't have any gardening equipment. So I was stressing out about what needs to go in this ginormous garage space other than my tiny little car. It was so funny to see that I was getting stressed out about all of these things, and I was looking at trying to order furniture before I moved in that could get delivered immediately after we had moved in. I was trying to coordinate all these different moving parts to make them all align to this one big moving day. I also realized that I would spend an extremely excessive amount of time on things like Pinterest and Etsy, trying to find all the perfect pieces for this new house, which is insane because this is a house that I have spent no more than probably 20 minutes in when I went to view the property at first. And so the idea that I had to buy and order and have all these things delivered for moving in was a really curious thing for me to be aware of and for me to see that my thought pattern had gone down that route. Um, I did some thought work myself, which as good coaches, we should always be doing the coaching on ourselves. And I also worked through some of these thoughts with my own coach. And when I dug a little bit deeper, what I realized was that I was actually uncomfortable with empty space. This idea of having all this empty space, this space that was unaccounted for, made me feel super uncomfortable. There was this real sense of urgency to fill the space, to make the space useful, for every corner of every room to have a purpose. And really, the thought I was telling myself was that I can't be wasteful of this opportunity. This house is a beautiful opportunity for me and for my family to move to the next level in our lives. And I was telling myself that I can't be wasteful of what this opportunity was that I had in front of me. The question that I asked myself, which is a question that I love to ask my clients, is this: where else does this show up in your life? So when I looked at this idea of being uncomfortable with empty space, I had a look to see where else this idea was showing up in my life. And what I discovered really surprised me. One place where I am uncomfortable with empty space, I realized, was in conversations. Now, I class myself as a bit of an introvert, which often surprises people, but I'm certainly someone who is more comfortable in small groups or in one on one rather than in big groups with lots of people that I don't know. And so I could see that in these situations where I was around lots of strangers and having to talk to people for the first time, I would feel really uncomfortable if there were any gaps in conversation. And I would be the one talking a million miles an hour to fill all the empty space because I felt really uncomfortable with that. Another area that I could see that this empty space was making me feel uncomfortable was when it came to my work schedule. So when I would look at my calendar, perhaps a month ahead, and I would see gaps in time in my calendar, I would start to feel really uncomfortable about this empty space and this unused space. This idea of there being potential there and me not using this potential space to its fullest capacity was something that I felt really uncomfortable about. The area that surprised me most when I looked at feeling uncomfortable with empty space was around exercise and working out. Now, I am someone who has always been involved in exercise and sports. I played volleyball and netball as a kid at a fairly high level. And so, competitive sports and having that as part of my lifestyle has just been this ever present thing for me. But what I realized was that if I had an hour to exercise, I had to make sure that I used that hour as best as I possibly could. And to me, that meant sweating and working out to the point where I was ready to pass out on the floor. If it was something that was a more gentle approach, that was about flexibility or mobility or some conditioning work, then I would see that as unmet potential. I'd see that as empty space that wasn't used as best as it could be. And this is certainly something over the last probably 4 or 6 months that I have been able to kind of change my thinking around. The trainer that I'm working out with now, it's a much more holistic approach, and I can really see the benefits in that. But it's something that has been ever present for me with regards to working out until fairly recently, is this idea of if every single moment of that hour is not used and in as hard a way as possible, then it's wasted space. This need to fill all the space is just a form of controlling. And I could see that it was this default way of thinking for me. It was old patterns that were coming up from the past. And I think that's why I felt uncomfortable with it, because I realized that it wasn't aligned with how I wanted to show up for myself and how I wanted to live my life today. I could see that it was inherited from ways that I had watched my parents show up in their lives. Um, as a kid, everything was always planned out. There wasn't much space for creativity or spontaneity in our family. And there was this idea of always needing to know exactly what lies ahead and the exact steps to get there. So I could really recognize these old ways coming up for me. So it was super important for me to pause and really dig a little bit deeper in there to see what that underlying belief was for me. What I reminded myself of, and this is something that only just last week I was coaching a client on, which was a beautiful reminder for me, was that I only need to know what the next step in this journey is. I don't need to know what the next stop along the way is. I just need to know the next step. And for me, the next step with regards to this house move is I just need to take all the things that I currently own, all the things from this house, pack it in a truck, take it round the corner, and unpack it into the new house. That's all I need to do. I don't need to know what this new house is going to look like in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months' time. I just have to take the next right step. And this is so true in business, it's true in our relationships, it's true in so many areas of our life. This idea of feeling the need to control things to such a degree that we don't allow any space for any magic or any synchronicity to come in. And when I looked at how this whole move came about, there was no aspect of control for me. So I really had to remind myself to just trust that things were always working out for me, that things would work out perfectly as they always do in hindsight, and that I didn't need to micromanage this down to the finest detail of synchronizing all the deliveries to happen on the day that I moved into this new house. An important part in this is not to just immediately thought swap. And by thought swap, I mean to just take that thought that we had and switch it for a better one, because it doesn't really address that underlying feeling. It doesn't really help us recognize why we feel the way we feel in that moment. Essentially, it's just another form of controlling. We just swap one thought for another, but we're still trying to control every single aspect of the situation. So I asked myself, what if I just didn't try to change or control anything? What if I just allowed myself to feel uncomfortable? To feel like I could look at this unused space and be okay with the discomfort of it. When it comes to selecting things that are going to go into this new home, I want to be super intentional about it. I want to make sure I've got my list when I go to IKEA and I don't leave with another 57 items of things that I did not need going in. IKEA has a way of doing that to all of us. But I really want to be intentional about all the things I bring into this space. Now, I have allowed myself to buy one thing for moving in, which is a new sofa that will be delivered tomorrow when I move into the new house. And it really feels like an intentional and symbolic purchase for me. The sofa that the boys and I have been sitting on for the past few years in this current house is this little 2-seater sofa bed. And it was perfect for this house because it's all we could fit in the tiny little living space that we had. And so this new sofa is perfect for this next phase as we move into this new house as a family. My boys are growing. They have a tendency to do that as much as I would like to keep them small forever. And I want us to have space to feel comfortable and to feel like we can grow into this new house. I'm actually really excited now when I think about this new living space, and it just has this new sofa, it just has my bookshelf, and it just has this old vintage chest that I've had since I arrived here in Australia, and it's followed me from house to house and is really sentimental for me. This idea of being able to sit in the discomfort of not immediately decorating and buying all the things to fill all the spaces in all the rooms feels really intentional, and that's really the energy that I want to move into this new house with, to trust that it will unfold in the most perfect way. If you recognize this feeling of being uncomfortable when it comes to having empty space, whether that's in your physical environment or emotionally, then that is completely normal. We are so conditioned to just distract ourselves when things get uncomfortable. But the truth is, we need to be able and willing to experience all of the emotions. That's what the human experience is. We're taught that we just want to be happy all the time. Clients come to me and they say they just want to be happy. As parents, we say we just want our kids to be happy, but that's actually not the truth. We don't actually want to be happy all the time. If we get news that one of our loved ones has received a diagnosis, we don't want to be happy in that moment. If we hear something on the news, we don't want to feel happy in that moment. We want to be able to sit in the discomfort and not distract ourselves from that. Because if we rob ourselves of those darker emotions, those feelings of discomfort, those feelings of anxiety, those feelings of being overwhelmed, if we rob ourselves of actually fully feeling those emotions, then we can't truly appreciate the other end of the scale. If we don't appreciate and experience those darker ones, we don't know what it is to actually be happy. If we were happy all the time, we wouldn't know we were happy because we would have nothing to compare it against. There's no contrast there. So we want to be able to experience all of the emotions in our life. We want to be able to do this in our relationships, in our work, in our roles as parents and our roles as partners and sons and daughters. We want to be able to experience this broad spectrum of emotions because that's what brings the richness to our lives. It's all too easy to buffer and to avoid these darker emotions. And I could recognize that's what I was doing when I was spending endless hours on Pinterest and on Etsy trying to find these perfect pieces. I was just distracting myself from this feeling of uncomfortableness, this feeling of being not quite ready for this next step, for feeling out my depth with this house that was feeling bigger than where I was at the moment. And I was using technology, social media as a buffer to avoid feeling those feelings. And as a society in today's culture, we're told that that's okay. We're told to reach for the quick fixes. If we feel sad, then eat the chocolate. If we feel stressed out, pick up a glass of wine. If we feel sad about something else, we can just go shopping. Like we're taught to kind of reach for these instant gratifications, and it's this idea of instant reward, and that really robs us of this more longer term well-being because we can't sit in those difficult emotions. We distract ourselves from them. This past year, my word of the year has been contentment. And it often surprises people because it doesn't automatically sound like this big, powerful word, this super motivation and word of inspiration. It feels a bit vanilla. But for me, contentment is about being happy and appreciative of all the things I have in my life right now, today, but also being eager and excited to see what lies ahead, to see what is around the corner. And so I have decided to approach this move and this discomfort with the empty space with this idea of contentment in mind. It's a really beautiful opportunity for me to feel into this, to fully appreciate all the things that I'm taking from this home at the moment and moving into this bigger space that is full of potential, is full of empty space for me to create with intention and with love and with a view of where I want to take my life, and not in a way of just filling in the empty space because it feels uncomfortable. That's all for this week, guys. For updates, be sure and subscribe to my newsletter over at varilongmuir.com and come follow me on Instagram. I'm at Vari Longmuir. If you go and check me out on Instagram, you will see lots of pics of the move. I'll be keeping you posted on my story over the coming weeks of all the things that are happening in the new house. And it will also keep me accountable if you can, come follow along and make sure that I am keeping all the spaces and not filling them with all the things immediately. So come and follow me over on Instagram if you don't already at Vari Longmuir. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Have an amazing week, and I will talk to you next week from my new house. Have a great week, guys, and I'll speak to you soon. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd love for you to come check out my private coaching service for artists and creatives. Maybe you're struggling to commit to just one of the hundreds of ideas you have. Or perhaps your confidence has taken a bit of a dive after that epic fail. Regardless of what you're struggling with, a single coaching session can give you the focus and clarity you need to take the next right step for you. Head on over to varilongmuir.com/coaching for more information and to book your session.